going and what the world was like all those years ago.
Well, I guess for half the globe would have been blue, studded with clouds, and the other half would have been brown and green.
From orbit, you would have seen the continents bunched together on one side of the planet, with the land to the north and south separated by a warm, ancient ocean called the Tethys. There were plenty of clouds, but no great ice caps at the poles.
As far as we know, there was no substantial ice on the planet, so it would have been a warm, what we call a greenhouse world with elevated levels of carbon dioxide. Imagine, if you will, a sort of gigantic Bahamas extending right over large tracts of what we call today the Middle East. That part of the world, you'd have a lot of shallow water, carbonate environments, so not so different from the barrier reef. Obviously, there are the marine reptiles, and there are the land-loving reptiles as well.
It was into this greenhouse world that our carbon atom had been released. Now it was one of the many CO2 molecules helping to keep the climate of the dinosaurs hotter than any other period in the planet's history. For perhaps 100 years, it swirled through the landscape, over oceans and deserts, mountains and lakes. Eventually, it drifted into a primeval Jurassic forest. It spent a season inside the leaf of a ginkgo tree, and another 50 years in the body of the dinosaur that ate it. It passed from plant eater to meat eater before being exhaled back into the atmosphere, once again as carbon dioxide. Our molecule drifts on, and finally is swept out over the ancient Tethys Ocean. One day in the future, this warm equatorial seascape will become the oil-rich deserts of the Middle East. But now, the sea is rising, and so are the temperatures. Both the atmosphere and the oceans are loaded with CO2. Our molecule slips into the sea to become food for a phytoplankton cell. Trillions of these tiny plants swarm near the surface, all soaking up the sun and sucking in CO2. Inside this cell, our carbon dioxide molecule is transformed into an energy-rich sugar via the flash of a prehistoric sunbeam. As a means of capturing solar energy and storing it for later use, photosynthesis is brilliant. The cell divides, and then divides again. Sunlight and carbon dioxide are being harvested and squirreled away into organic cell walls and fatty carbohydrate molecules. The whole Tethys Ocean is blooming with phytoplankton. Jump forwards to our modern world. The individual algal cells in a phytoplankton bloom may be microscopic, but en masse, you can see them from space. Giant green swirls appear in places where plant food is concentrated by winds, currents or rivers, or trapped by restricted circulation. If you go to one of these places, You can glimpse the beginnings of the process that formed oil in the past, happening in the ocean today. I'm heading into the Gulf of Mexico, offshore from New Orleans. The waters here have a bit of a nutrient problem, courtesy of the Mississippi River. Every spring, a flood of plant food in the form of nitrogen and phosphorus washes out into the warm Gulf waters from the farms and cities of Middle America. Warmth, sunshine and fertiliser. The perfect trigger for a bloom of phytoplankton. Once a month, a research team monitors the changing water conditions. I follow them into the pea green soup. As summer progresses, the waters here are overwhelmed with planktonic algae and bacteria, rich in organic hydrocarbons.
The important point is when you change the nutrient loads, you change what's growing in the water. And high nutrients favour those organisms that are ultimately going to lead you to a black, stinky black mud and ultimately a black shale.
There are so many dead and dying plankton cells sinking down that their decay starts to use up the oxygen in the water below.
And if it removes all that oxygen, those deep waters will become anoxic. They're devoid of oxygen. And you'll start to screen out a lot of the organisms that just can't live.
As we drop into the increasingly stagnant green gloom, the leg of an oil platform becomes our only reference. From about 10 metres down, we enter what local fishermen have dubbed the dead zone. They find nothing alive down here to catch. A steady rain of microscopic bodies is now sinking uneaten towards the stagnant seafloor below.
And if there are no organisms there churning it up, moving it around, then essentially you have this sort of millimetre, layer by layer of accumulation of mud.
"300 metres below perhaps the most fertile region of the ocean today, the water is anoxic, totally devoid of oxygen. A steady rain of dead plankton cells has accumulated into a thick, quivering, uneaten, black organic ooze. And another step on the long road to an oil deposit is complete.
Many of the petroleum source rocks that we see in the geological record accumulated in these extremely unhealthy environments.
And so they did in the seas of the Jurassic Middle East. Even at the surface, there was little oxygen in the bath warm water. Below lay a dead zone that stretched at least as far as Western Europe. Our carbon atom, bound up inside its dead planktonic host, settled into the stagnant darkness, along with billions and trillions of other little hydrocarbon-rich corpses.
The oceans then were just replete with organic matter. These microscopic plants proliferated in quantities that the world hasn't seen for millions of years. And they were also able to be preserved because these oceans were very prone to stagnation. So there was much less oxygen in the water, much less overturning of the water. The organic matter would sink to the bottom and be preserved, and then it would be buried by rapidly accumulating sediments.